The Tower of Babel explained. A punishment for pride, or a terrifying quarantine? From the silent depths of cosmic antiquity, where the ink of history has yet to dry, there echoes a question that has haunted the corridors of human consciousness for millennia. It is a question born not of spoken words, but of their sudden catastrophic absence. What happens when humanity, in its unified, nascent glory, speaks with a single voice, only to be plunged into a deafening chorus of confusion? What happens when our greatest monument to unity becomes the tombstone of our understanding? Welcome, seekers of forgotten lore, to the Eldritch Codex. Today we journey back to the dawn of civilization, to the sun-scorched plains of Shinar, to gaze upon a structure that exists more vividly in our collective memory than it ever did in sun-baked brick and tar. We speak, of course, of the Tower of Babel. For centuries, this story has been told as a simple parable, a lesson against the sin of pride, a divine retribution for mortals who dared to reach for the heavens. But here at the Codex, we peel back the sanctified scrolls of tradition to examine the glyphs of possibility hidden beneath. We ask a more unsettling question. Was the shattering of the Tower of Babel a righteous punishment for an act of cosmic hubris? Or was it something far more complex, far more calculated? Was it, in fact, a necessary language quarantine? A desperate act by a creator to save humanity from a monolithic future it was not yet ready to face? Join us as we sift through the dust of Babylon, decipher the architecture of ambition, and weigh the evidence in one of history's most profound and enduring mysteries. The verdict is far from written. To truly stand at the foot of that doomed tower, to feel the sun of Shinar on our faces and hear the hum of its impossible ambition, we must first perform an act of profound imagination. We must empty our minds. Empty them of the babble of our modern world, of the thousands of languages that crisscross our globe, of the borders drawn in sand and suspicion, of the very concept of foreign. We must travel back to a time when humanity was not a species but a family, a single tribe bound by a single memory, and speaking with a single tongue. This is the world before the fall. This is the unified dawn. Our story begins not with a birth but with a rebirth. The world has been scoured clean by a cataclysm of water, a great deluge that washed away an age of giants and wickedness. The slate has been wiped clean. From this global baptism emerges a single vessel, a wooden sanctuary bearing the seed of the new world. One man, Noah, his family, and the gathered fauna of the earth. When the keel of their ark finally scraped against the damp soil of the mountains of Ararat, its inhabitants stepped out into a world of profound and terrifying silence. A world empty of cities, of songs, of other voices. They were the entirety of our species, the sole inheritors of a drowned planet. Within them they carried not just the genetic code for all future generations, but also the psychic inheritance of the world that was. They carried the knowledge of agriculture, of astronomy, of craftsmanship, the faint echoes of a sophisticated, albeit fallen, antediluvian civilization. But more than that, they carried the trauma. They were survivors of a divine judgment, haunted by the memory of a sky that wept until it had consumed everything. This memory would become the ghost in the machine of their new civilization, a foundational anxiety that would shape the destiny of their children, and their children's children. In these early days, as humanity was but a single household, their unity was absolute, effortless. Their experiences were shared, their goals aligned: survival, procreation, the solemn duty to fulfill the first command of this new age. Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. They were a microcosm of perfect accord. And at the heart of this perfect accord was their greatest treasure, a tool of such power and purity that we, its fractured inheritors, can scarcely comprehend its nature. They possessed the one speech. The book of Genesis states it with a beautiful, stark simplicity. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. To our modern ears, this sounds merely like a lack of linguistic diversity, as if everyone simply spoke the same dialect of English or Mandarin. But the theological and philosophical implications suggest something far more profound. This was not just a language, it was the language. Let us call it the first tongue, the proto-speech. This was not a language that had evolved through centuries of cultural drift, migration, and compromise, as all our modern languages have. It was not a patchwork quilt of borrowed words and shifting meanings. Tradition suggests it was a language of pure, unadulterated reality, a language where the chasm that separates a thing from its name did not exist. Imagine a language without ambiguity, a language where sarcasm, irony, and subtle deception are structurally impossible. Imagine a word for stone that conveys not just the general idea of a rock, but its specific weight, its texture, its potential uses, its very essence. A word for justice that every speaker understands with the same immutable definition. A verb for to build that contains within its very phonetics the engineering principles required for the act. This was the Adamic language, the tongue with which Adam was said to have named the animals in the Garden of Eden, not merely assigning arbitrary labels, but articulating their true natures. It was less a tool for communication and more a tool for cognition. To speak was to think with perfect clarity. To listen was to understand with absolute fidelity. There were no thoughts lost in translation because there was no translation. The idea in one mind was perfectly replicated in the mind of the listener. What kind of society would such a language create? It would forge a civilization of unprecedented efficiency. The collective knowledge of the entire human race was a shared open-source database. An innovation in irrigation conceived by a man at one end of their settlement was instantly, perfectly understood and implementable by all. A new technique for weaving cloth, a more efficient way to fire pottery, a more accurate method of tracking the solstices. These ideas would propagate through the population at the speed of speech, without error or degradation. This created a state of collective consciousness, a single sprawling mind housed in a multitude of bodies. Collaboration was not a chore to be managed with charts and supervisors. It was an intuitive, seamless dance. Imagine 100 men tasked with moving a great stone. There would be no need for a foreman to shout commands, a little to the left. Stop. Now pull. The shared intent, the understanding of leverage and force, would flow between them as if through an invisible network. Their efforts would synchronize as one, a human machine of perfect unity. This was humanity in its raw, unfiltered potential. A beautiful but terrifyingly fragile monoculture. Their shared language created an effortless empathy. The joy of one was the joy of all. The sorrow of one was felt by all. But this also meant there was no room for dissent. No cultural friction to spark new divergent ideas. There was no minority report, no what if we tried it this way. Because the right way, the most logical and efficient way, was self-evident to all who spoke the first tongue. It was a golden age of cooperation, but it was also a golden cage of conformity. A single point of failure for the entire human experiment. For generations, this was the state of the world. As the family of Noah grew, it became a clan, then a tribe, then a nation of tribes, yet still they were one people. They were born into this seamless world of absolute understanding. The concept of a foreigner, of someone you could not understand, was as alien to them as the concept of silence to a world filled with sound. And so they began to move. The biblical text tells us they journeyed from the east. This was not the scattered, desperate migration of refugees. This was the slow, inexorable tide of a unified humanity expanding its dominion. They moved as one organism, flowing across the post-Diluvian landscape. The memory of the floodplains of their ancestors, the Fertile Crescent, likely pulled them westward, seeking a land that could sustain their growing numbers. This journey itself was a testament to their unity. They faced the challenges of the wilderness predators, harsh weather, uncertain terrain not as disparate families, but as a single coordinated entity. Scouts would report back, their descriptions of landscapes and dangers perfectly understood. Plans for the next day's march would be formulated and disseminated without a single misunderstanding. They were a walking city, a nation on the move, held together by the invisible, unbreakable threads of their common speech. And then they found it. After their journey across the rugged highlands and arid wastes, they descended into a valley, and the landscape transformed. Before them lay a plain. Not just any plain. It was a vast, billiard-table flat expanse of rich, alluvial soil, carved by the life-giving waters of two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The land we would come to call Mesopotamia. The land the scriptures call Shinar. To the people who had journeyed for so long, Shinar must have seemed like a paradise. A promised land. It was a tabula rasa, blank slate upon which they could write the next chapter of human history. The mountains they had left behind were the past, a symbol of their beginnings, of their confinement in the Arkansas. This plain was the future. It was wide open and filled with limitless potential. The land offered everything they needed. The soil was incredibly fertile, promising bountiful harvests. The rivers provided not just water for drinking and irrigation, but also a source of clay-fine, pliable clay, perfect for making bricks. And above them, the relentless Mesopotamian sun beat down, an ever-present kiln to bake those bricks to the hardness of stone. It was a land that did not just invite settlement. It invited construction. It was a landscape that whispered of permanence, of foundations, of building something that would last. Here, in this cradle of civilization, the unified humanity finally stopped its wandering. They settled, they farmed, and they prospered. The population swelled. Their single culture grew richer. Their shared knowledge more profound. But in the heart of this perfect unity, a new seed began to sprout. It was watered by the memory of the flood and fertilized by their own astonishing success. It was a seed of fear and a seed of pride. The whispers began, perhaps around the communal fires at night, as they gazed up at the vast, star-dusted canopy of the heavens. The same thought, articulated in the same perfect words, began to echo in the unified mind of the people. They looked at the sheer size of the earth, the vast, empty horizon, and the old fear resurfaced. The divine command to replenish the earth now felt less like a blessing and more like a threat, sentence to be scattered, to be diluted, to lose this precious, perfect unity that defined them. What if our children's children wander so far they forget us? What if the tribe splits, and we become strangers to one another? We were saved from the water as one. We must remain one. The trauma of the deluge was not just a memory of water from above, but of a world where humanity had been scattered and wicked. Their unity felt like a shield against that chaos. To disperse was to risk a return to that fallen state. Their instinct was not to embrace the wide world God had given them, but to recoil from it, to build a fortress against it. And mingled with this fear was a new, intoxicating emotion: pride. They looked at their flourishing farms, their organized society, their collective power. They saw what they could accomplish when they worked as one. They were no longer a small band of survivors huddled in the shadow of a mountain. They were a force of nature in their own right. The masters of this plain. It was here, at the confluence of this deep-seated fear of dissolution and the dawning arrogance of their own power, that the grand idea was born. An idea to defy the centrifugal force of history. An idea to create a permanent anchor for the human race. An idea to build a monument to their unity so powerful, so immense, that it would bind them together forever. And a name for themselves that would never be forgotten. They would not just build a settlement. They would build a city. And at its heart they would raise a tower that would challenge the heavens themselves. The stage was set. The materials were at hand, and the single unified will of humanity was bent toward a single spectacular and ultimately catastrophic goal. The world before Babel was perfect, but its very perfection contained the blueprint for its own destruction. On the vast sun-drenched canvas of Shinar, humanity had found its paradise. The fertile soil yielded its bounty with ease, the rivers quenched their thirst, and the seamless unity of their first tongue made society a frictionless machine. But paradise is a notoriously difficult state for mankind to maintain. For in the heart of contentment, two ancient seeds, dormant since the escape from the ark, began to germinate under the relentless Mesopotamian sun: the cold, damp seed of fear, and the hot, dry seed of pride. This potent combination would soon give rise to an idea and ambition so vast, it would seek to re-engineer humanity's relationship with the cosmos itself. This is the story of that idea's conception. This is the genesis of an ambition forged not in divine inspiration, but in human fire. The Bible presents the moment of conception with the chilling collective voice. Genesis 11 verse 3 begins, "And they said one to another." Pause on that phrase. There is no named leader, no king issuing a decree from on high. The scripture gives us something far more profound and democratic in its terror: a consensus. The idea did not originate from a single mind and trickle down. It seems to have emerged simultaneously from the whole, like a thought arising in a single superorganismic brain. This was the awesome and terrible power of the one speech. An idea once uttered could be examined, understood, and adopted with perfect fidelity by all. There was no room for misunderstanding, and therefore little room for dissent. The discussion that took place on that plane was likely the most efficient and most fateful board meeting in all of human history. Their conversation begins not with a grand vision, but with a practical problem of engineering. "Go to," they said. "Let us make brick and burn them thoroughly." This single sentence marks a pivotal moment in human consciousness. It is a declaration of technological independence. Up until this point, grand construction in the ancient world was largely an act of cooperation with nature. You found a mountain, you quarried its stone. You worked with the material that the earth provided. Stone was a symbol of divine creation, ancient, strong, and natural. But this new generation, these children of the plain, had no mountains to quarry. Shinar was a land of soft earth and river clay. They could have seen this as a limitation. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity. Let us make brick. The emphasis is on the act of creation. They would not find their materials. They would manufacture them. They would take the humble clay of the earth and, through their own ingenuity and the application of fire, transform it into something stronger, more uniform, and more reliable than stone. This is alchemy. It is humanity taking on the role of a lesser god, a demiurge, transmuting the elements of the world to suit its own purposes. And the command was to burn them thoroughly. The Hebrew here implies an intense, transformative fire baking them in kilns, not merely sun-drying them. This was a sophisticated, energy-intensive process. It speaks of organized labor, of vast supplies of fuel, of a mastery of pyrotechnology. They were not just making bricks. They were forging the very bones of their new world in the heart of the furnace. The roar of their kilns was the first anthem of the industrial age, a hymn to human power. The scripture then adds a crucial detail. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. The slime mentioned here is bitumen, or natural asphalt, which seeps from the ground in parts of Mesopotamia. This was another stroke of genius. While traditional mortar made of mud or lime could crumble and dissolve, bitumen was a superior adhesive, a waterproof, durable, and powerful binding agent. Think of the psychological significance. Their ancestors had been destroyed by a flood. Now they were choosing to build their new world with fire-hardened bricks and waterproof mortar. It was a subtle but profound statement of defiance. They were building a civilization engineered to resist the very methods of the last divine judgment. This was not just construction, it was the creation of a failsafe, a monument built on the principle of never again. With their materials secured, materials born of their own intellect, the true scale of their ambition was finally articulated. Let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. Here the project splits into two components, a body and a soul. First, the city. This was to be no mere collection of dwellings. It was to be the city, the singular, eternal metropolis of humankind, the nexus of their culture, their economy, their power, and their identity. In a world meant to be populated by dispersal, they chose to create a point of absolute convergence. It would be a world capital, the beating heart of their unified species. All roads would lead to this city because there would be nowhere else of importance to go. It was a plan for a globalized world, but a globalization of centralization, not connection. But it is the second component, the tower, that reveals the spiritual core of their ambition. A tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. Let us be clear. The ancient peoples were not naive fools. They did not literally believe they could build a brick structure that would physically poke through a solid firmament and allow them to step into the celestial realm. The phrase "its top in the heavens" was a common Semitic idiom, a piece of architectural hyperbole used to describe a building of immense, awe-inspiring height. But to dismiss it as mere metaphor is to miss the point entirely. The true ambition was metaphysical. The tower was to be a man-made axis mundi, a sacred mountain constructed by human hands. It was to be a manufactured connection between the terrestrial and the divine. In essence, they sought to bypass the established channels of communication with God: sacrifice, prayer, revelation, and build their own direct access point. It was a staircase, not an altar. It implied an ascent by right, not an invitation by grace. They would not wait for God to descend. They would ascend to meet Him on their own terms. And why? For what purpose did they need such a city and such a tower? The next verse, Genesis 11 verse 4, lays bare their soul with terrifying honesty. It reveals a motivation forged from that toxic alloy of fear and pride. "And let us make us a name," they declared, "lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." Let us dissect this statement, for it is the very thesis of their rebellion. First, let us make us a name. In the ancient Near Eastern worldview, a name, Shem in Hebrew, was far more than a label. It was a person's or a people's reputation, their essence, their legacy, their power. Great kings and gods were the ones who made a name for themselves through mighty deeds. For the people to declare that they will perform this act for themselves is a profound usurpation of divine and royal prerogative. It is a declaration of self-deification. They were no longer content to have their identity defined by their Creator. They would be the authors of their own story, the architects of their own apotheosis. They sought an earthly immortality through fame, a legacy written in brick and bitumen that would shout their glory across the ages. And then comes the fear that fuels this pride. Lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. This is the key. This is the moment of conscious and deliberate rebellion. They explicitly state their intention to defy God's very first command to their ancestor, Noah. Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. That was a command to disperse, to diversify, to fill the world's ecosystems with human life and culture. The people of Shinar heard this command, understood it perfectly, and chose to reject it. Their ambition was born of a profound insecurity. They saw dispersal not as the fulfillment of a divine plan, but as a path to oblivion. To be scattered was to be weakened, to be forgotten, to have their perfect cultural unity diluted and eventually dissolved into a chaos of competing tribes. The tower and the city were their anchor against this tide of entropy. It was a fortress of cultural purity, a dam against the command to flow outwards and fill the world. While the scripture itself remains silent on a singular architect of this plan, attributing it to the collective they, later traditions, seeking to put a face to this great rebellion, point to one man, a figure of legendary power and charisma mentioned just before the Babel account in the Table of Nations. His name is Nimrod, the great-grandson of Noah. The text describes him as a mighty hunter before the Lord. The phrase is ambiguous. Does before the Lord mean he was a great hunter in God's eyes? A servant of the divine will? Or does it mean he was a mighty hunter in defiance of the Lord, setting up his own power in opposition to the heavens? The first-century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, along with other non-biblical texts like the Book of Jasher, take the latter view. They paint a vivid picture of Nimrod not just as a hunter of beasts, but as a hunter of men. A charismatic despot who consolidated power and slowly turned the people's allegiance away from God and towards himself. In Josephus's account, Nimrod is the true author of the Babel project. He argues to the people that their happiness comes not from God, whom he paints as a capricious tyrant ruling through fear of another flood, but from their own courage and strength. The tower, in this interpretation, becomes an explicitly political and military project. Josephus writes that Nimrod proposed the tower so that if God ever sought to drown the world again, they would be high enough to be safe. It was to be a bastion of human self-sufficiency, a physical monument to the idea that they no longer needed God. Nimrod, in this telling, weaponizes their collective trauma to fuel his own political ambition. Whether led by a singular tyrant like Nimrod, or driven by a collective emergent consciousness, the result was the same. The decision was made. The ambition, forged in the fires of their kills and the crucible of their psyche, was now solidified. They would remold the earth. They would build a gateway to the heavens. They would immortalize their own name and defy the divine plan. On the plains of Shinar, the symphony of sedition had been composed. All that remained was for the work to begin. The great debate was over. The consensus, born of fear and forged in pride, had been reached. On the silent, fertile plains of Shinar, a decision had been made that would forever alter the trajectory of human history. The ambition, once a mere whisper around the night fires, was now the single thundering heartbeat of a unified people. And so the great work commenced. The world was about to witness the physical manifestation of a species' will to power. It was time to raise the shadow. It was time to build the ladder to the heavens. The transformation of the plain was swift and total. Shinar ceased to be a simple agricultural settlement. It became the largest construction site the world had ever known. A continent-spanning factory dedicated to a single monolithic project. The gentle rhythms of farming gave way to the relentless cadence of industry. The very air, once sweet with the smell of wet earth and growing things, grew thick and heavy with the dust of clay and the acrid smoke of the kilns. Imagine the logistics, orchestrated with the terrifying efficiency of the one speech. Entire legions of men were dispatched to the riverbanks, where they dug clay by the ton. An endless procession, like ants serving their queen, carried the raw material to the molding stations. Here another army mixed the clay with water and straw, packing the dense slurry into countless thousands of wooden molds, each one identical to the last. This uniformity was key. Their ambition was built on the principle of interchangeability. Every brick was a perfect replica of its brother, a single humble thought in the colossal mind of the tower. Then came the fire. The flat plain was now punctuated by the glowing maws of innumerable kilns, furnaces that burned day and night with an insatiable hunger. They were the roaring incandescent wombs where soft clay was reborn as hard, vitreous brick, hardened by a fire hot enough to rival the sun under which they toiled. The glow of these kilns banished the night, creating a perpetual restless twilight over the plain. Shinar no longer slept. Simultaneously, others worked the slime pits, gathering the thick black bitumen that oozed from the earth. They heated it in great cauldrons until it became a viscous, bubbling liquid, the dark, binding lifeblood of their creation. The smell of hot tar became the new perfume of progress, a testament to their waterproof, flood-defying design. This was a symphony of unified labor, a human machine operating on a scale that beggars belief. And the conductor of this symphony was their language. There were no misunderstood orders, no flawed blueprints, no delays caused by miscommunication. The architect's vision was perfectly transmitted, the engineer's calculations flawlessly understood. A call for 1,000 bricks was met with 1,000 bricks. A need for more mortar was fulfilled before the request was finished. Their shared tongue was the ultimate project management software, an invisible scaffolding of pure understanding that allowed the physical scaffolding to rise at a breathtaking pace. And so it began to rise, not as a slender spire, but as a colossal footprint, a vast square pressed into the face of the earth. The base alone was a city block, then a square mile, its dimensions speaking of an ambition that was fundamentally terrestrial. It was not seeking to escape the earth, but to dominate it, to create a new man-made geography. Layer by painstaking layer the structure grew. The rhythm of the work was hypnotic. A layer of fire-hardened brick, a binding coat of black bitumen, another layer of brick. Each course was a testament to their collective will. They were not just building upwards, they were building a new reality. With every brick they laid, their shared identity became more deeply mortared into the project. They were no longer just the descendants of Noah. They were the builders. But what form would this ladder to the heavens take? To understand the architecture of their hubris, we must look to the structures that would echo their design for the next 3,000 years across this very land. We must speak of the ziggurat. The tower at Babel was almost certainly a ziggurat, a form of terraced pyramid unique to the Mesopotamian valley. Unlike the smooth-sided pyramids of Egypt, which were sealed tombs for dead pharaohs, the ziggurat was a vibrant, functional, and deeply spiritual structure. Its name in the Sumerian language gives us its purpose, Unir, which means to stretch to the sky. It was a sacred mountain, a human-made replica of the cosmic mountain where the gods were believed to dwell. Its design was a physical prayer, a model of the universe itself. The base was the earth. The stepped levels represented the various planes of existence, and the small temple or shrine at its peak was the dwelling place of the gods, the gateway to the heavens. The most famous of these, the Great Ziggurat of Babylon, which many scholars believe is the historical basis for the Babel story, was named Amenenki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Its very name declares its function, to bind the mortal and divine realms together. The ziggurat was not designed for the common person to ascend. It was the domain of priests. They would climb its monumental staircases, which often ran up the main facade, to perform rituals, make offerings, and interpret celestial omens from their vantage point, high above the dust and noise of the city. It was also believed that the city's patron god would descend the same staircase to enter the shrine at the summit, to be present with his people. The ziggurat, therefore, was a gate of God, a babilu. It was a point of controlled access, managed by a priestly class, predicated on the idea that the divine must choose to descend. But the project at Shinar was different. It was a ziggurat built by the laity, for the laity. It was a gate of God they were building for themselves without invitation. They were not building a home to welcome a descending deity. They were building a ladder to launch their own ascent. It was a perversion of the ziggurat's purpose. They took a design meant for humble communion and weaponized it into a tool for audacious intrusion. Week by week, month by month, year by year, the tower climbed. Its shadow, a stark black triangle, was the first thing the people saw at dawn, creeping away from the base as the sun rose. At midday, it was a patch of darkness at the foot of the structure. And as evening approached, the shadow grew again, a colossal finger stretching eastwards, casting the entire city into a premature twilight. The tower became a great sundial measuring time not in hours, but in the progress of their own magnificent obsession. The higher they built, the more their perspective changed, both literally and psychologically. From the upper levels, the world below began to shrink. The bustling city, the vast plain, the life-giving rivers all became a map spread at their feet. This elevated view fostered a dangerous sense of detachment and superiority. They were no longer men walking on the earth. They were giants looking down upon it. And the sky, once an infinite and mysterious expanse, the very symbol of God's domain, now seemed closer, reachable. They could feel the wind that had never touched the ground, see the curvature of the horizon, watch the clouds form below them. This proximity bred not reverence but ambition. They were tasting the air of the heavens, and it was intoxicating. The tower ceased to be a mere project. It became the gravitational center of their entire culture. Their art would depict it. Their songs would praise it. Their children would be born in its shadow, taught that its completion was the ultimate purpose of human existence. The original fear that they might be scattered was now almost forgotten, replaced by a singular, unifying pride in what they were raising. They looked up at its impossible mass, at the sheer sun-baked walls of brick rising into the blue, and they did not see a tribute to their creator. They saw a mirror. The tower's greatness was their greatness. Its strength was their strength. Its defiance was their defiance. It was the ultimate selfie, a monument carved in 1,000,000 tons of clay, screaming a single message to the cosmos. We are here. We are one. And we are magnificent. This then was the rising shadow. Not just the physical shadow that fell across the plain, but the spiritual shadow that fell across the human soul. The shadow of an ambition that had eclipsed reason, of a pride that had blotted out humility. The ladder to the heavens was almost complete. But ladders can be used for descent as well as ascent. And as the builders toiled unaware on their man-made mountain, they had caught an eye. A power, ancient and vast, was beginning to stir, its gaze turning downwards towards the plain of Shinar, towards the proud and beautiful blasphemy that was clawing its way into the sky. The shadow of the tower now falls across our narrative, a stark silhouette against the sky of history. We have witnessed its conception in fear and its design in fire. We have seen the city rise and the ladder to the heavens climb, course by course, a testament to the terrifying power of a unified will. It is easy to look upon this achievement with a certain awe, to marvel at the sheer audacity and engineering prowess of the builders. But to do so is to admire the beauty of the poisoner's chalice without acknowledging its contents. Now we must step back from the physical structure and examine its philosophical blueprint. We must put the soul of the project on trial. For millennia, the story of Babel has been presented as the quintessential parable of human arrogance, the archetypal fall that comes after pride. This is the classical interpretation, the orthodox verdict. But what is hubris truly? It is not mere confidence or ambition. Hubris, in the ancient sense, is the act of a mortal willfully and knowingly transgressing the boundaries established by the gods. It is the creature attempting to occupy the throne of the Creator. Join us as we assemble the evidence for this interpretation. Let us listen not to the clamor of construction, but to the silent music that played in the hearts of the builders. Let us hear the symphony of pride. The first movement, the usurpation of the name. The opening notes of this symphony are found in the builder's own mission statement, the most explicit piece of evidence we possess. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, and let us make a name for ourselves. In our modern secular world, a name is often little more than a label, a convenient identifier. But in the sacred cosmos of the ancient Near East, a name Yeshem was a vessel of immense power. A name was inextricably linked to one's essence, one's reputation, one's authority, and one's very existence in memory. To name something was an act of dominion. In the Garden of Eden, the authority granted to Adam is demonstrated when God brings the animals to him, to see what he would call them, and his names stick. To have a great name was the ultimate blessing, a gift bestowed by a higher power upon a favored subject. God himself promises the patriarch Abram, "I will make your name great." Against this backdrop, the declaration, "Let us make a name for ourselves," is an act of breathtaking rebellion. It is a spiritual declaration of independence. It is the conscious seizure of a divine prerogative. The builders are no longer content to receive their identity from their Creator. They will forge their own. They will be the authors of their own significance. This is a quest for self-generated immortality. They understood that empires fall and people are forgotten. Their tower was an attempt to write their legacy in the universal language of architecture, to build a name so large it could never be erased by time or tide. It was a grasp for the eternal, an attempt to secure a renown that belongs only to the divine. This was not a plea for remembrance. It was a demand for it. It was the first and most audacious movement in their symphony of pride, a fanfare of self-glorification aimed directly at the heavens. The second movement, the fortress of defiance. If the first movement was a sin of commission, the seizing of a right not their own, the second is a sin of omission, a deliberate and calculated refusal to obey a divine command. Their stated motivation for making a name was not just glory but fear. Lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. This statement cannot be read in a vacuum. It must be seen as a direct response to the primary directive given to Noah and his sons, the foundational charter for this new, post-diluvian world. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The divine plan was for humanity to be a diaspora, to spread out, to adapt, to form a rich and varied tapestry of cultures across the globe. It was a command rooted in exploration, diversity, and the stewardship of the entire planet. The builders heard this command, understood its implications with the perfect clarity of their first tongue, and consciously chose to reject it. Their project was an act of architectural disobedience. They sought to reverse the centrifugal force of the divine will with a man-made centripetal force of their own design. The city and its tower were to be a cultural and gravitational anchor, preventing the very scattering they were commanded to enact. Why this fear of dispersal? It was a fear of losing control, a fear of the unknown, a fear that their perfect monolithic culture would be diluted, corrupted, and weakened if it spread too thin. Their unity, which should have given them the confidence to explore, had instead become a golden cage they were terrified to leave. They chose the perceived safety of a self-imposed prison over the glorious liberty of the open world. This is a profound rejection of trust in the divine plan. It is humanity saying to its creator, "Your vision for our future is flawed. We have a better idea. We will remain here in this fortress of our own making, under our own power, and we will preserve ourselves according to our own wisdom." This act transforms the plains of Shinar from a cradle of life into a citadel of defiance. The tower was not just a monument. It was a wall, a bulwark against their own destiny. The third movement, the alchemy of arrogance. The third movement of this symphony is not found in their words, but in the very materials they chose to build with. They used brick for stone, and bitumen for mortar. This detail, which seems at first like a simple note on engineering, is in fact a deep theological statement about their relationship with the natural world, and by extension its creator. Stone is the archetypal material of nature. It is ancient, solid, and divinely made. To build with stone is to work in partnership with the given world. The builders, however, lived on a plain devoid of stone. They could have seen this as a divine sign to remain nomadic, or to build humbly with the materials at hand. Instead, they saw it as a problem to be solved by their own intellect. Let us make brick. This is the motto of the alchemist, the cry of the industrialist. It is the decision to no longer accept the world as it is, but to fundamentally transform it. They took the humble, soft clay of the earth and through the transformative power of Phyrea power often associated with the divine, they created a new substance, a synthetic stone, arguably superior to the original in its uniformity and ease of use. Then they bound these man-made stones with bitumen, a waterproof adhesive. The symbolism is chilling. Their ancestors were judged by water. They chose to build the centerpiece of their new world with fire-hardened, water-resistant materials. This was a structure implicitly designed to defy any future flood. It was a technological ark, an insurance policy against the wrath of God. This act represents a fundamental shift in consciousness. It is a move away from stewardship and towards mastery. It is humanity as the new demiurge, the lesser god, who finds the created world insufficient and sets about improving it according to its own designs. The constant roar of their kills and the bubbling of their tar pits was the sound of this new philosophy, an Actiona philosophy that placed human ingenuity at the center of creation. Their technological prowess was not a source of gratitude, but a source of ultimate pride, convincing them that there was no problem, natural or divine, that could not be solved with enough fire and cleverness. The camera pulls back to show the immense, unified crowd working as one. Then, it zooms into the eye of a single observer god looking down from above. The feeling is one of sober, solemn assessment, not anger. The fourth and final movement, the terror of a perfected will. And now we arrive at the final crashing crescendo of this symphony. It is the most subtle, the most profound, and the most terrifying aspect of their hubris. It is the moment when their greatest blessing, their perfect unity, became the ultimate engine for their sin. It is the moment when God Himself looks down and makes a divine threat assessment. The scripture tells us, "And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." Read those words carefully. This is not the voice of an insecure deity, threatened by the success of his creation. It is the voice of a master diagnostician, observing a pathology that has reached a critical stage. It is a statement of profound and terrible awe at the power of a unified human will when it is aimed in the wrong direction. Nothing will be restrained from them. This is a divine admission of humanity's near-limitless potential when acting in concert. With a single mind, a single language, and a single purpose, there is no technological, social, or architectural feat they cannot achieve. They can remake the world. They can, for all intents and purposes, become as gods. But what have they imagined to do? Their first great act as a unified species was not an act of worship, of exploration, or of selfless creation. It was an act of self-glorification, defiance, and a paranoid consolidation of power. Their perfect unity had not led to perfect virtue. It had led to perfect, frictionless arrogance. The one speech had become a vector for a single, monolithic, prideful idea to infect the entire species without any hope of an intellectual or cultural immune response. This is the ultimate danger of the builders. The project itself, a single tower, is merely a symptom. The disease is the state of their soul. A humanity that is unified but unhumbled is a threat to the cosmic order. A species with limitless potential but no wisdom is a danger to itself and all of creation. Their harmony had been weaponized. Their collective consciousness had become a hive mind bent on its own deification. From this perspective, the divine intervention that followed was not a capricious act of a jealous God. It was a tragic but necessary act of cosmic surgery. The project could not be allowed to continue, not because the tower was too high, but because the hubris was too deep. Humanity, in its glorious unified infancy, had proven itself to be its own greatest threat. The symphony of pride had reached its final, deafening chord, and a divine silence was about to fall. The case for hubris was closed. Judgment was at hand. The tower stood at the zenith of its defiance. A jagged man-made peak of fire-hardened brick. It tore at the sky above the plains of Shinar. Below, the city teemed with the ceaseless, synchronized activity of a species that had perfected the art of cooperation. The builders, drunk on their own success, looked up at their creation and saw the reflection of their own perceived divinity. They had forged a new reality, written a new law, and were on the cusp of immortalizing their name. The symphony of pride had reached its final, triumphant crescendo. They held their breath, waiting for the applause of history. They would get, instead, a judgment of absolute silence. The biblical narrative pivots with a sentence of chilling simplicity and immense theological weight. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. Genesis 11 verse 5. Do not mistake this for the act of a distant deity needing to get a closer look. An omniscient God has no need for reconnaissance. This is a literary device to convey a profound legal and royal truth. This is the king descending from the remote splendor of his palace to walk the streets of his domain. It is the judge entering the courtroom to inspect the evidence firsthand before passing sentence. The descent is not for information. It is for imminence. It is the moment the abstract threat of divine authority becomes a terrifying localized presence. The atmosphere over Shinar, once filled with the dust of construction and the smoke of kills, now grows heavy with an unseen, unbearable gravity. And in that divine presence a council is held. A decision is made in the highest court of the cosmos. The narrative voice shifts to a majestic, mysterious plural. Come, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Genesis 11 verse 7. Who is the us? Theologians have debated this for ages. Is it the whisper of the Holy Trinity? Is it God addressing his angelic court, the heavenly host? Regardless of the interpretation, the effect is the same. This is not a unilateral, impulsive act of anger. It is a deliberate, considered verdict delivered by the full authority of the divine realm. A plan has been formulated to deal with the Babel problem. And what is the nature of this judgment? It is here that the event transcends all previous acts of divine retribution. This is not the brute force of a global flood that scours the world. It is not the targeted hellfire that consumes the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. The judgment at Babel is infinitely more sophisticated, more intimate, and in many ways more cruel. It is a surgical strike against the very software of civilization. It is an attack on the invisible architecture of the human mind. The weapon chosen is not fire or water. It is meaninglessness. Imagine the moment. There is no thunderclap, no earthquake, no pillar of fire. There is only a sudden catastrophic shift in the fabric of reality. A master architect stands on the fifth tier of the ziggurat, a scroll of plans in his hand. He looks down at a team of engineers preparing to hoist a massive timber beam. He opens his mouth and calls out a precise sequence of orders, words he has used 1,000 times before. But what comes out is not the crisp, universally understood proto-speech. It is, to the ears of his men, a stream of guttural alien noises. They stare back at him, their faces masks of utter bewilderment. One of them shouts a question back up to him. What did you say? Repeat the command. But to the architect, the question itself is a nonsensical babble. A string of chaotic sounds with no rhythm or reason. He feels a surge of rage and frustration. Are they mocking him? Is this a mutiny? He bellows the order again, his voice cracking with fury, pointing emphatically at the beam. Below, his men recoil. The voice of their leader, once the sound of pure reason, is now the terrifying roar of a madman. On the ground, a bricklayer turns to his partner, his lifelong friend, the man with whom he has shared every thought since birth. He gestures to the pile of bricks and says a simple phrase meaning, "We need more mortar." His friend looks at him, his eyes wide with fear. The words he heard were not words at all, but a foreign melody of betrayal. He responds in his own new tongue, a desperate plea for understanding. What is happening to you? Why do you speak in riddles? The first man hears only gibberish. The bond of brotherhood, forged over a lifetime of shared understanding, evaporates in a single terrifying moment of miscommunication. Suspicion, cold and sharp, replaces trust. The contagion spreads across the plain at the speed of thought. It is a virus of the mind, rewriting the source code of every individual. The seamless human machine grinds to a catastrophic halt. The supply lines collapse. The men in the clay pits can no longer understand the men driving the carts. The cart drivers cannot understand the men firing the kills. The men at the kills cannot understand the builders on the tower. Orders are lost, materials are sent to the wrong locations or not sent at all. The intricate dance of logistics devolves into a stumbling, chaotic mess. The very concept of cooperation dies. A team of 10 men trying to lift a single stone now pulls in 10 different directions. Arguments erupt, escalating from confused shouting into violent shoving matches. Fists fly where handshakes once sealed a shared thought. The symphony of construction becomes a cacophony of panic, a hellish orchestra of 1,000 languages, each one a testament to a newly forged isolation. What does it feel like when the very foundations of reality crumble beneath you? It is the birth of radical subjectivity. For the first time, a human being is utterly, terrifyingly alone in his own head. The world outside his own mind has become a foreign country. The people he once knew as extensions of his own consciousness are now opaque, unpredictable, and frightening strangers. The project, the great unifying dream, is instantly forgotten, supplanted by a single primal need: to find someone, anyone who makes sense. And so they left off building the city. The tower, unfinished, now stood as a monument to their failure. Its jagged, incomplete top was no longer a finger pointing to the heavens in pride, but a wound in the sky, a permanent reminder of the day understanding died. The noise of industry was replaced by an eerie silence, the silence of 1,000 newly formed tongues, each one a cage. The great scattering began. It was not an organized departure. It was a slow, tragic drifting apart. Small groups began to coalesce, drawn together by the magnetic pull of shared sound. A family would huddle together, realizing that only they could still understand one another. They would look with fear and suspicion at their neighbors of yesterday, whose speech was now alien and menacing. Slowly, these new linguistic clans began to move away from the cursed plane. They picked up their tools and their children and turned their backs on the tower, the symbol of their broken dream. They walked away from the half-finished city, abandoning the infrastructure of a world that no longer existed. Their exodus was a funeral procession for a dead utopia. Each group, bound by its new exclusive language, set off in a different direction, seeking a place where they could be alone, where everyone was not a stranger. The divine command they had so arrogantly defied was now being fulfilled as a direct consequence of their punishment. They were scattered abroad upon the face of all the earth, and the place was given a name to seal its legacy in eternal infamy. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound Babel, the language of all the earth. The very word Babel, which to them sounded like the Hebrew verb to confuse, became a synonym for that state of utter, incomprehensible chaos. The fall was complete. Humanity's central nervous system had been severed. The tower stood, a physical husk, but its soul was gone. The unified mind of the human race had been shattered into 1,000,000 lonely shards. And in the silence that followed, a new concept was born into the world, a concept that would haunt us to this very day. The concept of the other. The age of unity was over. The long, bloody, and beautiful age of the nations had begun. And so the dust settles on the plain of Shinar. The echoes of 1,000 new tongues fade as the tribes of humanity begin their long, lonely march into history. The tower stands broken, a monument to a spectacular failure. The orthodox verdict seems closed, signed, and sealed. Humanity, in its arrogance, reached too high, and for this sin of pride, it was struck down and condemned to an eternity of division. Case closed. But here at the Codex we do not close cases so easily. We are taught to look at the evidence from all angles, especially those that make us uncomfortable. So let us now engage in a thought experiment. Let us pick up the shattered pieces of this story and reassemble them in a different configuration. Let us, for a moment, set aside the simple narrative of a wrathful God punishing insolent children. What if we were wrong? What if the event at Babel was not primarily an act of punishment, but an act of prevention? What if it wasn't a sentence for a past crime, but a radical, desperate intervention to save humanity from a future far worse than division? Let us examine the case for Babel not as a judgment, but as a necessary, if brutal, quarantine. Let us weigh the evidence for a cruel mercy. The diagnosis, the pathology of a perfected union. To understand this theory, we must first reconsider the divine perspective. The classical interpretation paints God as a jealous king, angered by a challenge to his authority. But an omnipotent, omniscient being is, by definition, unthreatened. What if the divine assessment in Genesis 11 behold, the people as one, and now nothing will be restrained from them, was not a cry of insecurity, but a clinical diagnosis? Imagine God not as a king on a throne, but as a divine physician looking down at a petri dish containing the whole of the human experiment. He observes a culture that is growing at a phenomenal rate, a single undifferentiated superorganism. But he also sees a pathology at its core. The organism is unified, yes, but it is unified in its arrogance. It is brilliant, but it lacks wisdom. It is powerful, but it lacks humility. The disease identified is not the tower itself. The tower is merely a symptom, a feverish expression of the underlying illness. The disease is monolithic unity. It is the terrifying fragility of a single point of failure. With one language, one culture, one mindset, and one center of political power, humanity is catastrophically vulnerable. Think of it in modern terms. It is a global computer network, running a single operating system with a fatal security flaw. A single virus, whether it be a tyrant, a corrupt ideology, or a self-destructive idea, could infect the entire network instantaneously. And with no other networks to offer an alternative, with no external systems to provide a backup or a reboot, a single infection would be terminal. The entire human project could be hijacked, corrupted, or destroyed in a single generation. This is the terror God observes from on high. The builders, in their quest for a permanent, unified glory, were inadvertently building the perfect prison for the human soul. They were creating a world where dissent would be impossible, where cultural evolution would cease, and where a single mistake could lead to species-wide extinction or eternal servitude. From this perspective, their unity was not a blessing to be preserved, but a tumor to be excised. The procedure, a metaphysical vivisection. Come, let us go down, and there confound their language. This is not the swing of a blunt hammer. It is the precise incision of a scalpel. The divine action does not target the people's bodies. It targets the invisible sinews that bind them together. It is a vivisection of the human consciousness. The goal is to break apart the superorganism into smaller, viable, independent units. The confusion of tongues is the method. Language is the operating system of culture. It is the code that structures thought, shapes community, and defines reality. By fracturing the single language into thousands, God does not just make communication difficult. He shatters their shared reality. He creates new tribes not by drawing lines in the sand, but by drawing lines in the mind. This act of confounding is, from one perspective, an act of unparalleled cruelty. It rips friend from friend, brother from brother. It sows chaos and suspicion where perfect harmony once reigned. It is the deliberate introduction of the other into the human family. And yet, if the diagnosis was correct, this cruel procedure is also an act of profound mercy. It is a controlled demolition of a structure that was about to collapse on top of everyone inside it. The scattering that follows is not a punishment. It is the post-operative recovery phase. By forcing humanity to disperse across the globe, each new linguistic tribe carrying its own unique fragment of the original reality, the procedure ensures the survival of the species through diversification. It is a prophylactic measure, a forced quarantine to prevent the spread of the monolithic disease. It guarantees that never again can a single tyrant, a single dogma, a single Nimrod, capture the will of the entire human race. A wall of mutual incomprehension has been erected between the peoples of the earth, and that wall, while the source of endless conflict, has also been our most enduring firewall against absolute power. The prognosis, the gift of pluralism. What is the long-term result of this quarantine? A fractured, conflicted world, certainly. A world of tragic misunderstandings, of wars fought over differences in language, culture, and belief. This is the pain, the cruelty of the mercy. But look at what else was created. From the ashes of that single uniform culture on the plains of Shinar rose the glorious, chaotic, and breathtakingly vibrant tapestry of human civilization as we know it. Could it be that the confounding of tongues was not a curse, but the greatest gift humanity ever received? That single note of the first tongue was shattered into the infinite symphony of human languages, each with its own unique poetry, its own way of seeing the world. The single story of the builders was broken into the 1,000 epics of the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Persians, the Mayans, the Zulu. The monolithic architecture of the tower gave way to the soaring Gothic cathedral, the serene Japanese temple, the intricate Islamic mosque, and the geometric beauty of the Pueblo. In this light, the divine act at Babel was an act of enforced creativity. It was the ultimate rejection of a sterile utopia. It was God choosing a world of dynamic, dangerous, and beautiful complexity over a world of static, safe, and ultimately dead-end perfection. The quarantine created a resilient ecosystem of ideas. If one culture grew corrupt or stagnant, others could challenge it. If one empire fell, humanity would endure. The division of mankind became its greatest strength, the very engine of its cultural, scientific, and spiritual progress. This reframes the divine command to fill the earth. It was not merely a command to breed. It was a command to diversify. It was a recognition that humanity could only reach its full potential by adapting to every corner of the planet, by developing a multitude of responses to the challenges of existence. The builders, in their fear, rejected this path. The intervention at Babel, in its cruel mercy, forced them back onto it. It was the act of a parent who breaks a child's favorite toy because the child refuses to go outside and play in the real world. The tears are real, but the lesson is vital. The verdict from this perspective is clear. The fall of Babel was not the tragic end of a golden age. It was the violent, painful birth of the world we now inhabit. It was a necessary quarantine, a radical surgery that saved us from the silent, comfortable death of a perfect, singular vision. We were not punished with division, we were blessed with it. And the conflicts and struggles we have endured ever since are not the lingering effects of a curse, but the growing pains of a species that was forced, for its own good, to become infinitely more than it had ever dreamed of being. The dust of Shinar never truly settled. It was scattered to the four winds, carried away with the departing tribes, and it has coated the entire surface of human history ever since. The fall of the tower was not a singular event that ended. It was a Genesis event that is still unfolding. The shattering of the first tongue was not a punishment that was served once and forgotten. It was the implantation of a new source code for the human condition, a code of division, of misunderstanding, and of strife. But it was also a code of diversification, of resilience, and of breathtaking creativity. The legacy of Babel is, therefore, a profound and deeply uncomfortable paradox. It is at once our original sin and our most necessary blessing. It is the wound in the human psyche that has never healed, and it is the crucible in which every unique culture on earth was forged. To understand the world we inhabit today, its conflicts, its glories, its technologies, its very soulway must walk through the long, echoing shadow cast by that one unfinished ziggurat. This is the legacy of the fall. These are the echoes in our fractured world. The primal wound, the birth of the stranger. The most immediate and brutal legacy of Babel was the birth of a concept that had never before existed: the stranger. Before the fall, humanity was a single us. In the instant after, it was fractured into an us and a countless multitude of thems. For the first time, a human being could look upon another human being and feel not kinship but alienation. They could hear another speak and perceive not meaning but a threatening noise. The person on the other side of the river, the one who looked just like you but spoke in a garbled tongue, was no longer a brother. He was an object of suspicion, of fear, and potentially of hostility. The inability to understand was interpreted as an unwillingness to agree, and this misunderstanding became the fertile soil for millennia of conflict. This is the source code of xenophobia. It is the genesis of tribalism. Every border drawn in the sand, every wall erected to keep others out, every banner under which men have marched to war against those who speak a different language or pray to a different god, is a direct echo of that moment of catastrophic confusion on the plain of Shinar. The curse of Babel was not merely the loss of a language, it was the loss of effortless empathy. We were given the gift of identity, but it came at the terrible price of otherness. And we have been paying that price in blood and treasure ever since. The paradoxical splendor, the birth of worlds. Yet, from this primal wound, something magnificent and wholly unexpected grew. This is the other side of the legacy, the positive interpretation of the quarantine theory made manifest in history. In shattering the monolithic culture of the builders, the event at Babel did not destroy human creativity. It atomized it, creating 1,000 new big bangs of cultural potential. The single uniform world of Shinar died, but a multiverse of human worlds was born in its place. Each scattered tribe, now isolated by its unique language, was forced to adapt to its new environment and develop its own unique solutions to the problems of existence. The single story fractured into 1,000,000 different myths and epics. The one truth diversified into the vast ecosystems of philosophy and religion. Think of it. Would the precise, logical philosophy of the ancient Greeks have emerged from the same culture that produced the cyclical, meditative spirituality of the Vedic sages in India? Would the pragmatic, honor-bound society of the Roman Republic have created the same art as the ethereal, nature-worshipping artists of the Tang dynasty in China? The answer is almost certainly no. This glorious, chaotic, and beautiful tapestry of human culture is a direct result of our separation. The beauty of a Thai temple, the polyrhythmic complexity of a West African drum circle, the existential weight of Russian literature, the soaring ambition of a Gothic cathedral, these are all fruits that grew on the separate branches of the same shattered human tree. The confusion of tongues in this light was the greatest catalyst for creativity in the history of our species. We lost a single world, but we gained 1,000. The price of otherness was conflict, yes, but its reward was a richness of human experience that the builders, in their monochrome utopia, could never have conceived. The historical echo, the ghost of the ziggurat. As these new cultures coalesced into nations and empires, the ghost of the tower began to haunt them. The story of Babel became a recurring archetype, a mirror in which every ambitious civilization saw its own reflection and often its own doom. Whenever a great empire arose, Babylon itself, then Persia, then Romite, was in essence a new attempt to reverse the verdict of Babel. It was an attempt to reunify a piece of the fractured world under a single language, Latin, a single law, Roman law, and a single ruler, the emperor. These empires built their own towers of administration, of military power, and of stone, seeking to create a new stable unity. And for a time they succeeded. But the legacy of Babel teaches that all such towers are built on unstable ground. The centrifugal forces of linguistic and cultural identity eventually proved too strong, and these monolithic empires crumbled from within, breaking apart once more into the disparate peoples they had conquered. The tower, as a symbol of doomed imperial hubris, has cast its long shadow over every emperor from Caesar to Napoleon. But humanity, it seems, is a creature that cannot help but build. For every collapse, a new attempt at reunification arises. The great universalizing religions Christianity and Islam sought to build a new kind of tower, a spiritual one, to unite humanity under a single God and a single truth. The Enlightenment philosophers of the 18th century sought to build a tower of pure reason, believing that a universal logic could transcend cultural differences. In the 20th century, Ideologies like communism sought to build a tower of economic class, believing it could unite the workers of the world and render nations obsolete. Each of these was a grand, sincere, and ultimately fraught attempt to heal the wound of Babel, to find a new first tongue that all of humanity could speak. Each has left its own mark, its own triumphs, and its own ruins upon the landscape of history. The modern incarnation, the digital Tower of Babel. And this brings us to now, to our time. For we, the children of the 21st century, are the most ambitious builders since the people of Shinar. We are, at this very moment, engaged in the construction of the most comprehensive Tower of Babel ever conceived. Our plane of Shinar is not a physical place, but a digital one, the Internet. It is a space where, for the first time since the fall, the entire human race can gather in a single interconnected forum. Our fire-hardened bricks are microchips and servers. Our bitumen is the code that binds the network together. We are actively and consciously attempting to reverse the ancient confusion. We have a new candidate for the one speech. English has become the de facto lingua franca of global commerce, science, and digital communication. And where English fails, we have built technological interpreters' translation algorithms that can, with ever-increasing accuracy, bridge the gaps between the scattered tongues. We are building a world where the curse of mutual incomprehensibility is being systematically dismantled. We are building this tower for the same reasons as our ancestors. We seek to make a name for ourselves as a globalized, connected species. We seek the power and efficiency of seamless communication and collaboration. And we are driven by a fear of being scattered and divided in a world facing global problems like climate change and pandemics, problems that seem to demand a unified response. But the ghost of the old tower looms over our new one, asking us the same unsettling questions. As we build this magnificent structure of fiber optics and data, are we ushering in a new golden age of understanding? Or are we merely constructing a new, more sophisticated prison of monolithic thought, the very thing the original quarantine was designed to prevent? Look closely at our digital city. We speak of global connection, but our algorithms herd us into digital tribes, echo chambers, and filter bubbles that reinforce our own biases. We have more access to information than any humans in history, yet we are drowning in misinformation and fake news. A new kind of confusion of tongues, where words are weaponized to mean anything and everything, eroding the very possibility of a shared reality. We have built a tower that allows for instant communication, but we use it to engage in global shouting matches, to cancel those with whom we disagree, and to enforce a new kind of ideological conformity on a scale Nimrod could only have dreamed of. Perhaps the disease of the monolithic mind does not require a single language, but merely a single dominant network. The legacy of Babel is not a simple story of a forgotten past. It is a living diagnosis of the human condition. We are a species eternally caught between a yearning for the lost unity of the garden and the hard-won, chaotic diversity of the wilderness. We are the scattered children of Shinar, using the tools of our own genius to rebuild the very tower that symbolizes our greatest failure, hoping that this time somehow the outcome will be different. The echoes are all around us. The question is, have we learned to understand their warning? We have journeyed far. We have walked the sun-scorched plains of a newborn world, felt the heat of the kills that forged an empire's ambition, and climbed the impossible tiers of a tower built to challenge God. We have stood in the silence of its fall and walked with the scattered tribes into the dawn of our own fractured history. And now, here in the quiet halls of the Codex, with the dust of millennia settling around us, we return to the precipice where we began. We must weigh the evidence, consult the ancient heart of the story, and render a verdict. The Tower of Babel, a righteous punishment for an unforgivable act of hubris, or a prescient, terrible act of a necessary language quarantine? The case for hubris is formidable, written in the very words of the Genesis account. It is a story we understand instinctively, for it is the story of every tragic hero, from Oedipus to Macbeth. It is the sin of overreaching, of believing one's own glory to be self-made and eternal. We saw it in their desire to make a name for themselves, a clear usurpation of a divine right. We saw it in their open defiance of the command to fill the earth, choosing instead to build a fortress of fearful conformity. We saw it in their alchemical arrogance, preferring their own fire-forged bricks to the stones of God's creation. And most damningly, we saw it in the divine assessment itself, that with their prideful unity, nothing will be restrained from them. This is the classical verdict, a timeless and thunderous warning against the arrogance of the human heart. In this light, our divided world is a perpetual sentence, a prison of misunderstanding we have earned for ourselves. Yet, the case for quarantine is equally powerful, if far more unsettling to our modern sensibilities. It asks us to see beyond the lens of sin and punishment, and to instead see an act of cosmic strategic foresight. This interpretation reframes the divine motive from anger to a kind of ruthless compassion. It presents a creator diagnosing a terminal pathology at the heart of the human superorganism, the disease of a monolithic culture, vulnerable to a single point of failure. The confusion of tongues ceases to be a punishment and becomes a radical, painful form of inoculation. The scattering is not an exile, but a necessary deployment to ensure species survival through diversification. In this light, our fragmented world is not a prison, but a life raft. The walls of language and culture that divide us, while sources of conflict, have also been our salvation, a firewall that has prevented any single tyrant or toxic ideology from conquering the entire human mind. This verdict suggests our diversity is not a sign of our fallenness, but the very instrument of our endurance. It is a cruel mercy, a salvation that feels like a curse. So where does the truth lie? Does the Codex find for the prosecution citing hubris? Or for the defense arguing quarantine? The answer, like so many truths hidden in the folds of ancient texts, is that the simple binary is a trap. It forces a choice between two sides of the same tarnished coin. The verdict of the Eldritch Codex is this: the two are not mutually exclusive. They are, in fact, inextricably linked. The one necessitated the other. Perhaps the event at Babel was a necessary language quarantine precisely because of their unforgivable hubris. The hubris was the disease. The quarantine was the only cure. Humanity, in its first great collective act, proved itself to be too proud, too ambitious, and too self-obsessed to be trusted with the power of perfect unity. The limitless potential that God Himself acknowledged was aimed not at wisdom or worship, but at self-deification. It was this diagnostic fact that made the radical surgery of division not just an option, but an imperative. The mercy was cruel only because the sickness was so profound. Therefore, the Codex does not offer a simple verdict of guilty or not guilty. It offers a diagnosis of the human condition itself. The story of Babel is not merely a historical account or a simple parable. It is the defining myth of our species' inherent paradox. We possess a godlike potential for creation, but it is shackled to a tragic, recurring impulse towards self-destruction. We yearn for unity, but we seem incapable of achieving it without falling into the trap of monolithic pride. And so, the final echo of Babel is the one we see in our own world today. We stand on our own digital plane of Shinar, using our own fire-forged technology to rebuild that tower, to reverse that ancient verdict. We are connecting all of humanity with a speed and intimacy that would have stunned the builders. But what have we learned? As we forge this new global mind, are we filling it with the wisdom of our diverse experiences, creating a mature, resilient unity? Or are we simply recreating the old hubris on a new platform, building a new monolith where dissent is silenced and a new singular ideology can reign? The question that the Tower of Babel asks of us is not ultimately about the past. It is about our future. What was truly shattered that day was not just a tower of brick, but the dream of a simple, easy utopia. It was the moment we were told we were not yet ready for our own power. And perhaps the most unsettling legacy of all is the quiet, persistent question that remains. Are we ready now? Thank you for joining us on this exploration into the heart of one of humanity's most foundational and enduring stories. The mystery of what truly happened at Babel continues to challenge us, speaking to the very core of who we are and what we aspire to be. If you wish to continue this journey, to delve into the other forgotten histories, cosmic questions, and unsettling truths that lie dormant within the pages of our past, then we invite you to subscribe to the Eldritch Codex. Strike the bell of notification, so you are not left in silence when a new page of the Codex is turned. And now we turn the verdict over to you. Join the great debate in the comments below. Based on the evidence, what is your conclusion? Was the defining event at Babel an act of divine punishment for hubris, or was it a calculated act of quarantine to ensure our survival? The discussion begins now. Until next time, remain curious and listen for the echoes of the voices that were silenced.